Good morning, everyone. May I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my and the Court's respects to elders past, present and emerging. I acknowledge the distinguished presence of the Honourable Mark Dreyfus, KCMP, Attorney General for the Commonwealth of Australia. The Honourable Elizabeth Evatt, AC, the first Chief Justice of the Family Court of Australia, and whom Lighthouse High Risk Evatt List is actually named after. The Deputy Chief Justice, Robert McClellan, AO, Justice Jacoba Brash, Judge in charge of the Critical Incident List, Judge Kate Hughes, Co-Chair of the Court's Risk Committee, and Judges of the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia Division 1 and the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia Division 2. Her Honour, Judge Skinner, President of the Children's Court of New South Wales. Our special guests today, Miss Rosie Batty, AO, Mr and Mrs Lloyd and Sue Clark, Miss Danielle Carroll and her husband Reese, Miss Anne Hollands, National Children's Commissioner, Hayley Foster, CEO of Full Stop Australia, Pip Davis, Principal Solicitor of the Women's Legal Service of New South Wales, and Angela Lynch, formerly of the QLS and now a court consultant. Also, Gabby Bashir, President of the New South Wales Bar, Peter Dunning, KC, President of the Australian Bar Association, and of course other members of the profession and legal profession. Representatives of the Family Advocacy and Support Service, including Matthew, is here today, and of course Relationships Australia. I would like to begin by also welcoming you here today to this event to officially launch Lighthouse, a critical part of the Court's response to family violence in our community. Family violence in our society is, as we all know, a national disgrace. It is often unreported. That has led in the past to courts not always having appropriate information before them, which has also compounded the absence of adequate risk screening. Lighthouse will go a long way to solving these risk screening issues and of course the problems with delay. Lighthouse is a world-leading initiative of the courts that focuses on the safety of children and vulnerable parties in our society. This is done in two ways. Firstly, through the clear identification of safety risks at the very start of the proceeding, and secondly, utilising the most effective and appropriate case management pathway, including referrals to much-needed support and health services, particularly for people at high risk. Now it is a proven model and has, during its pilot, demonstrated great success. Safety and access to justice are two of our major priorities in the Court. And this model helps to achieve both. Before I address you today on the importance of Lighthouse, I have the honour of introducing the Attorney General for the Commonwealth, Mark Dreyfus, KCMP, to speak. The Attorney General is a keen supporter of the Lighthouse project and indeed of our courts. I thank the Attorney General personally, also the Senator the Honourable Katie Gallagher, Minister for Women, Minister for Finance and Minister for Public Service, and the Honourable Amanda Whitworth, MP, Minister for Social Services, for their support of this vital project. Whilst I know the later two ministers weren't able to be here, they've sent their representatives. I also thank the government, including those in Cabinet and the Prime Minister, who have prioritised this project in difficult times because it was the right thing to do. They should all be appropriately recognised for their support of this important initiative and for their broader response to family violence to the National Plan to end family violence against women and children. Knowing the Attorney General as I do, he is not only one of the nation's most astute lawyers, he is also a man with deep commitment to access to justice, and his support of Lighthouse has been essential to its succession. His support of it has seen this model and indeed this program grow to where it should be today. The Attorney General recognises, as does this government, and I think all those in Parliament, the need to take active steps to eradicate the devastating effects of family violence in our society. Today is a very positive step towards that goal. Attorney General.
Thanks very much. Good morning, and thank you for the introduction, Chief Justice. Can I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'd like to extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples present today, and I reiterate the government's commitment to implementing the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full, beginning with a referendum to enshrine an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice in the Australian Constitution during this term of Parliament. I also wish to acknowledge any victim survivors and their families who are with us today. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for your ongoing strength, courage and perseverance in your advocacy. And I know that the Chief Justice has already acknowledged all of the distinguished guests who are here with us, but I want to mark again the presence of the Honourable Elizabeth Evatt, First Chief Justice of the Family Court of Australia. It's wonderful to have you here. Can I thank Chief Justice Alsterdam for the opportunity to launch the expansion of this initiative. On average, one woman a week is murdered by her current or former partner in Australia. We must do better. The Albanese government is committed to turning the tide on this terrible statistic. Today, I just want to run through some of the work which is already underway. On the 17th of October 2022, Commonwealth, state and territory governments released a national plan to end violence against women and children. The 10-year national plan sets out a comprehensive whole-of-society approach to end gender-based violence in one generation. The time frame is ambitious. It must be. Intimate partner violence is the major preventable risk factor for illness and death in women aged between 18 and 55. I use the word preventable deliberately because, as the national plan shows, there is much more we can and should do and should be doing to prevent domestic and family violence. The Albanese government is delivering a record $1.7 billion to transform this plan into action. For my portfolio alone, this funding has not only allowed for the nationwide expansion of the Lighthouse project, which brings us all here today, but has also provided better support to the courts and legal aid commissions which are on the front line of domestic and family violence. Our understanding of family violence is slowly changing. We now understand that coercive control involves using a pattern of abusive behaviours against another person over time, with the effect of establishing and maintaining power and dominance over them. The National Plan recognises that. I'm also working with the states and territories to develop national principles to address coercive control. The national principles will help create a shared national understanding of coercive control. This is critical for improving community awareness and will be an important tool in improving the safety of women and children. These are ambitious, nation-changing reforms. I believe they will join a long tradition of great social reforms by Labor governments. When the Whitlam Labor government enacted the Family Law Act in 1975, we established a family law system that came to be admired around the world. A key feature of that reform was the establishment of the Family Court of Australia, a specialist multidisciplinary court that would serve the best interests of children and would regard the best interests of children as the paramount consideration when resolving family disputes. Recent inquiries, including the 2019 Australian Law Reform Commission inquiry and the 2021 Australian Parliament Joint Select Committee on Family Law inquiry, revealed that the Whitlam government vision for the court has been eroded through neglect and a lack of resources. Extensive court delays, protracted litigation inaccessible support services and inadequate protection for people at risk of family violence are just some of the issues that have dogged the family law system for many years. The government is committed to ensuring that legal assistance providers and community-based services are accessible, affordable and well-equipped to help separating families resolve disputes in a timely and safe manner, so litigation is a last resort. I'm considering all recommendations of the ALRC report and will action as a priority those recommendations that put the safety of children first in the family law system. It's critical the system protects those at risk of family violence at the earliest point possible, including children and young people. The government is committed to working with the courts to improve the capacity of the family law system to respond to family violence and support vulnerable parties and children. We must work together to ensure the family law system is accessible, safe, properly resourced and simpler to use. Our courts must deliver justice and fairness for all Australian families. And that's why the Albanese government is funding a national rollout of the Lighthouse project. I commend the Federal Circuit and Family Court, and particularly the court's registry staff, for their initiative in developing and rolling out the initial Lighthouse project pilot from December 2020. Initiatives such as the Lighthouse project show what can be achieved when we work together to combat gender-based violence. The Lighthouse project has seen a fundamental shift in the way the courts identify and manage risks to family safety. It shows we can do better. This world-leading initiative helps shape the allocation of resources and the urgency given to cases based on a safety risk assessment. A key element of the Lighthouse project is the EVIT list, the specialist case management pathway established to resolve high-risk matters. Across the 3 pilot sites, just over 1,000 matters have been triaged into the EVIT list. This ensures matters identified as high risk are before a registrar at the earliest point in time after screening. The success of the Lighthouse project is how it has been seamlessly integrated into the court's other measures to improve case management and responses to family violence in the family law system. Parties who are identified through risk screening as being at lower risk are directed to family dispute resolution where appropriate, which supports the earlier and more efficient resolution of their disputes. Where parties or children are identified as being at higher risk, co-located child protection and policing officials assist the courts by facilitating the timely sharing of family violence information held by their agencies. I understand co-located officials at those registries that have piloted the Lighthouse project have on occasion turned around critical information within an hour. As I'm sure everyone here would appreciate, this prompt information sharing can be crucial in high-risk matters. By prioritising the hearing of matters with high risk of family violence, the courts are able to deliver better support to vulnerable parties and children to resolve family law matters in a safe, child-centred, accessible and timely way. The Albanese government is proud to be investing in the expansion of the Lighthouse project. We believe more vulnerable Australians who use the court system will benefit from the improved risk identification and management processes as demonstrated by the pilot. I commend everyone involved with the Lighthouse project for your ongoing effort and dedication to ensuring this crucial work continues. Keeping families safe is at the heart of the family law system. It is the first and most important duty of those who run our courts. Helping you fulfil that duty is one of my most vital duties as Attorney General. Congratulations to all who have made the Lighthouse project a success, and thank you very much for having me here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General, for your words of support for this important initiative. I'd firstly like to thank Rosie Batty, Sue and Lloyd Clark, Danielle and Reese Carroll for their attendance and support today. I cannot imagine the pain they've all been through and continue to deal with on a regular basis. I greatly respect their strength and their willingness to help others. Through their advocacy, they honour their loved ones lost through terrible acts of family violence. It is much of their advocacy that has seen programs like Lighthouse supported, and they've made a significant difference in raising the awareness and public awareness of this terrible scourge on our society. Today should be a proud moment for each of them. I know, having spoken to each of them at length, that they have been advocating for a real improvement for years. Also, speaking to Matthew from FAS, their referrals have increased in Parramatta dramatically during the pilot of Lighthouse, and they're expecting, as is Relationships Australia, a significant improvement across the country. Dealing with family violence in our society, as the Attorney said, has to be prioritised. For the courts, it is our responsibility to ensure that each decision we make is safe, carefully considered, well informed, and of course in the best interest of children. This includes managing risks of family violence appropriately. Risk screening is vitally important to that work. The data already gathered through our Notice of Risk demonstrates the need for Lighthouse. Major risk factors are alleged to be in the following proportions in parenting cases filed before the court. In family violence, 80%. Child abuse or risk of child abuse in 70% of all matters filed. Mental health issues harming a child or putting a child at risk is at 58% of all matters, and drug and alcohol and substance misuse harming a child or putting a child at risk is in 53% of matters. And the data reveals that these cases are not just ones which have one risk factor. In 66% of matters, parties disclosed more than 4 risk factors, a prevalence much higher than previously understood. Indeed, in almost 80% of all parenting cases filed last year, those matters had to be referred to state or territory child welfare agencies due to the risk alleged. These figures are as shocking as they are surprising and go some way to depicting the prevalence of family violence and other risks in our courts and community. Lighthouse was born of a vision of our courts and Lisa O'Neill, one of our senior registrars, that screening litigants for family violence as soon as they enter the court system will help ensure the safety of families and children. This will in turn ensure better outcomes for families to move on with their lives. Lighthouse is not just about legal outcomes, but aims to ensure better health outcomes, such as supporting mental health, wellbeing and also social support, such as financial counselling, rehabilitation programs or parenting programs, so that children can thrive. Lighthouse involves 3 interconnected processes for parenting cases. Firstly, each is risk screened through a secure online platform at the point of filing. Assessment and triage of cases by teams of highly qualified specialists who will provide support and refer the parties to support services, both legal and non-legal, and safe and tailored case management for each family law case, which includes referring high-risk cases to a dedicated specialist court list, known of course as the Evatt list. As previously stated, this is a world-leading model. We are the first courts to implement bespoke confidential risk screening at the point of filing. I acknowledge Professor Jennifer McIntosh, who is here today and has played a critical role in developing the Family Doors triage risk screening, tailoring it to specific needs of our courts. Courts in the United Kingdom and New Zealand have already expressed interest in what we are doing and will be following our progress with great interest. The pilot has received very positive independent evaluation. It was recommended for continued funding in the final report by the Joint Select Committee of Australia's Family Law System and acknowledged as intrinsic to the Court's key reforms in the draft National Plan to End Family Violence Against Women in 2022-2032. The pilot has demonstrated the need to appropriately manage risk screening and cases involving Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. The Court greatly expanded the number of Indigenous family liaison officers employed by the courts to support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island peoples through our system and through our specialist lists. I note that our local Sydney Indigenous Family Liaison Officer is in attendance today. Whilst Lighthouse is a centrepiece of the Court's family violence response, it is in fact part of a suite of initiatives the Court has been implementing, or courts have been implementing, to help protect vulnerable people. These include co-location of police and child welfare representatives within court registries, information sharing arrangements to allow judges and registrars to obtain critical information from state and territory agencies, minimising the risk of economic coercion in smaller financial disputes through speedy and low-cost registrar-led lists and mediation, the use of secure safe rooms in court buildings, and of course the use of electronic hearings and electronic mediations to minimise risk and any concern about having to attend the registry. I want to thank my good friends, the Women's Legal Services across Australia, who have continued to meet with me, particularly during COVID, and give me valuable feedback about our systems and help us anticipate what's actually happening on the front line of family violence. Their assistance has been invaluable. I'm delighted that Hayley Foster, Angela Lynch and Pip Davis are here today. During COVID, they and other women's legal groups across Australia became vital advisors to me, and they continue to be. I'm very grateful for Hayley, Angela and Pip's support and wise counsel. Whilst we at the courts as support services are doing what we can when family violence actually occurs, as the attorney said, more needs to be done. It is time for all of us to expect, perhaps to demand, that as a society we have a proper national conversation about this disgraceful conduct. A conversation that seeks to properly understand the causes, to educate, to communicate and to prevent and indeed condemn this behaviour. It is not just a responsibility placed on government. It is a responsibility we should all bear as parents, as siblings, as families, as friends, as teachers, as co-workers, as employers, as sports people, and even as media and indeed community leaders, all with the same message. As Australians, we say, no, this cannot continue to happen. We simply cannot accept in our society the fact that one woman a week is murdered by their current or former partner, that 1 in 6 women have experienced physical or sexual violence, or 1 in 4 women have experienced emotional abuse from a current or previous partner. We cannot accept that 1 child is killed every 14 days, or the direct and indirect harm caused by family violence experienced by thousands of children and vulnerable parties each year. Tens of thousands of children each year. Harm that often these victims never recover from. This message and the launch of Lighthouse is particularly fitting given we're in the middle of the United Nations 16 days of activists against gender-based violence. The courts are committed to continuing to implement reforms that will benefit the most vulnerable members of our community, and most importantly, their children, and in particular, to protect them from the impacts of family violence. We look forward to working with the government and indeed all the user groups to ensure we have the type of family law system that was originally envisaged in 1975. Thank you very much. I now call upon Hayley Foster, CEO of Foresight Australia.
Thanks very much. I too would like to acknowledge that we are all meeting on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my deepest respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here in this room and those of whom we have the privilege and pleasure of working alongside in this incredibly important work. I'd like to also thank and acknowledge the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, and his team for making it a first commitment of this government to the Uluru Statement of the Heart. I'd also like to acknowledge the Chief and the Court for ensuring that Aboriginal liaison officers right throughout Australia are part of this model. A system that works for our First Nations people is a system that will work for everyone. To the Attorney General, it's great to have you here, and the Chief Justice, I just want to acknowledge you as well, and the Deputy Chief Justice, hello, as well as the eminent Rosie Batty, you are, Sue and Lloyd Clark, and Daniel and Reese Carroll. Your presence here is you're the reason that we've gotten to this point, along with the many survivors of domestic and family and sexual violence who have stood up and spoken out against a system that was not doing the best that it could do to put their safety and their children's safety first. And all of the advocates, and many of you who are in this room and have already been mentioned, who have been working for decades to bring this attention to the government and to the courts. I think it's important when we think about the leadership of people like the survivors here in this room, the contribution that they make, because the only reason that they do everything that they do is so that no one ever has to go through what they went through. And I think we should always remember how generous and incredibly, how lucky we are and how grateful we need to be for people who have done that. And the people in this room are very much, lighthouses in that sense. We've already spoken about some of the statistics. We've heard that, and we know that family violence and abuse is at epidemic levels in this country. We know that 1 in 6 women and 1 in 16 men have experienced some form of intimate partner violence. Children, though, right? 1 in 6 girls and 1 in 9 boys has experienced some form of physical or sexual violence before the age of 15. And that is a huge part of the focus of this court and the conversations we've been having for the many years to get us here. And I acknowledge Anne Hollins, the Children's Commissioner, is here with us today. Your attention on this issue, your leadership, and I know as part of the national plan, you never ever fail to make sure that children are at the centre, so I want to acknowledge that as well. So here we are. Families in the context of family violence, rely upon the court for their very safety. And the stakes are really high. We know that it is at the highest risk time for people to experience an escalation and fatal violence when they're separating and also accessing core systems. So these changes are, make no mistake, they are landmark changes. We now have, as the Chief has explained, identification, risk assessment, specialist judicial officers, a case management pathway with wraparound support, and a focus on safety first. I want to acknowledge the Women's Legal Service sector, Women's Legal Service Australia, for your Safety First in Family Law campaign that has very much been emanated here in this model. I mostly want to acknowledge the survivors, and I think that's why the Chief has put me here. The survivors who have already been through the system and have experienced decades of trauma, decades of a lack of safety, and who have spoken out, and there are many who are speaking out day in, day out and working with us to try to make change. This is really your win. I want to acknowledge that this would not have happened either without the leadership of the Honourable Chief Justice Will Ostrogen. Never ever have myself as a sector and my colleagues ever felt so respected genuinely and listened to and had our advice taken on board. It is quite remarkable, and to David Pringle as well and your team behind it, it's a stellar, amazing team who have really driven that reform internally. I do want to also acknowledge the previous government for their commitment to these reforms, and that needs to be acknowledged, but also the current Attorney General and the current government for taking it with gusto and taking it even further. And I also want to acknowledge that the current Attorney General has been, all through the years of in being in opposition, has also constantly met with us and constantly listened and constantly been there, and that is a huge sign of the way forward. I think, as we'd spoken about before, this government is not wasting a minute, and we're very, 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 very pleased and very grateful for that commitment. Also pleased to hear that there's going to be a focus on implementing recommendations and no more inquiries at this point in time. We've had a lot of inquiries, and we're very, very pleased to hear that we're going to get down and start implementing some of those recommendations, this being one of them. So today is cause for celebration. Every single survivor of family violence who have stood up and spoken out, and every single advocate who has been there to support them and amplify their voices, this day and this win is for you. Thank you so very much. There is still a long way to go, as Rosie and I just spoke about, but the future now, for the very first time, looks very, very hopeful. Thank you.
I now call upon the mother of Luke, the former Australian of the Year and Domestic Violence Prevention Advocate, Ms. Rosie Betty AO.
It's really great to be here, and a really great opportunity to say thank you to the Chief Justice and the team for making it possible to include myself and the other families here who are experiencing and going through trauma, loss, grief on levels that only us understand. It is a horrific journey. We do this because we want to make sure that no one else has to suffer like we do. And yet I know within the next week or so, another woman will be murdered. Within the next 2 weeks, another child will be murdered. We have to do better. This is such great news. It is sad. It is sad to, we represent sadness, but I also want to represent strength, resilience, and hope, not sadness. It takes years of hard work, and I am delighted that my colleagues from Women's Legal Service are here today. The Safety First campaign sucked the life out of me. I spent 3 years working with them to get in front of government to say we are failing women and children through the family law court system. We need a government appetite. How do we change this? Another inquiry was the best we could do. We knew what was wrong. So many victims cannot speak out. What is designed to protect and keep them safe suppresses and silences and allows this disastrous journey to be kept a shameful secret. This has been a long time coming. There is still an awful lot of work to do. But this is what so many women and organisations, as Haley said, the expertise that is held, that has not been regarded, respected and understood. We and the women's space are critical in this solution. You cannot be a good parent if you're a violent and abusive partner. Kathy Humphries, University of Melbourne. You cannot be a good parent if you are a violent and abusive partner. We have to change the journey for children if we seriously want to change this in a generation, because we are failing children big time. We don't believe them, we minimise their risk, and they are the most powerless. So it's really important to acknowledge those that are more vulnerable. I, as a white middle-class woman, had a voice because I experienced a tragedy that horrified people, stopped them in their tracks. How could a young boy be murdered by his father at cricket practice. There'd been years of coercive control, red flags. There's no one's fault. The fault lies with the perpetrator of the violence who chose to kill Luke to make me suffer for the rest of my life. Suffer he has made me, but he hasn't ruined my life. Being able to advocate has given me purpose and meaning. Being alongside amazing, inspiring people gives you the energy and the journey ahead that you know we're always changing, we're always evolving, but it seems too glacially slow. And for many it is. I'd like to think I have been able to contribute to raising awareness of family violence, bringing it out from being some dirty little secret that people wanted to ignore and pretend wasn't happening. But I felt a sense of defeat and failure when I tried to tackle the family law court system. But as standing up as an advocate for family violence and those victims, I wanted to change the victim blaming narrative. Why doesn't she just leave? There are many barriers. We're beginning to realise that is your highest risk for some fatalities. For others, it also combines with fear of homelessness, hardship. When you're juggling all of these things and really trying to manage your family, on top of that, to be dragged through the family law court system, where your mental health is used against you, where the mental health of your children is prevented, where the system is enabled and used against you, that is incredible. This Lighthouse program is such an essential part. It will take time before everybody across this system, everybody across the system is family violence informed and doesn't bring their bias to the table. We all have to dig deep and really be accountable for the part that we individually play. I'm thrilled, Attorney, that now we have a government that I can believe in, that will and needs to and has to prioritise this system, because our judicial processes continue to work against women and children experiencing violence. I've heard the Chief Justice and those from my colleagues speak about the importance of listening to each other, respecting expertise. You cannot do this without doing that. And I am so thrilled that we now have a culture of being able to collaboratively come together and work on these solutions. Because we don't want to be keeping advocating for another 10 and 20 and 30 years. In my lifetime, I need to see that the grandchildren I won't ever have, but my brother, he will. That we recognise family violence. What was that? What was that? I can't believe we used to turn a blind eye to it, didn't understand it, didn't call it out, colluded, ignored, and then blamed the victim because she wasn't keeping herself safe enough, because she didn't leave when she should have. That what did she do to aggravate and cause the situation? We have a lot of work to do before those victim-blaming narratives are addressed and turned around, because there's one person that should be blamed, and that is the person who chooses to use violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosie. Can I now call upon Lloyd and Sue Clark, parents of Hannah Clark and the founders of the Small Steps for Hannah Foundation. We exist to halt domestic and family violence.
Good morning. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge all the special guests here today, ladies and gentlemen. Most of Australians have heard the story of our family and how we lost our daughter, Hannah, and our 3 grandchildren, Aaliyah, Leanna and Trey, to a brutal, jealous act of domestic violence. What people may not know is that despite a long history of what we now know was coercive control, Hannah had no exposure to family courts. Her interactions with the justice system and ours were at police and magistrate levels. So we don't stand here and claim to be experts in family court matters. What we do know, though, is just how difficult it can be for a person to get away from a controlling and abusive and violent relationship. And of course, we know how dangerous it can be. There are so many things that need to go right for someone to safely make that journey away from a dangerous relationship. Firstly, the person needs to make the choice to leave, and they need to be at peace with that choice. What that means is deciding to leave can be a long and wavering process. Someone may need to make that choice many times over before they actually do it. Secondly, they need a good support network. Somewhere safe to go, especially if there are children involved, and family or friends who will accept their decision and take that journey with them.
Most of all, however, victims of violence and coercive control need the full protection of the law. That often starts with police officers who understand the problem and do everything they can to help the victim to safety. But it extends to the court system, and ensuring the process involves as little trauma and confrontation as possible. And that's why we're here to applaud the work of the federal and family courts for the Lighthouse Project. At its heart, the Lighthouse Project is an effort to treat the applicant to the court as an individual, not a number. It recognises that people who present themselves to court seeking help are often vulnerable, frightened and uncertain of what's going on. It recognises that they may be of risk of physical or mental harm, and it puts in place a set of responses tailored to each individual, instead of a one-size-fits-all model for court applicants. It applies the right level of urgency for every case. It assigns specialist judges and court officers to meet individual needs of applicants. This is such a radical departure from the way family court matters have traditionally been managed, and for one that we are certain will make the process better and safer for all involved. We commend those responsible for coming up with the Lighthouse Project. It's likely that you won't ever know how many lives you will improve and how many lives you will save as a result of this initiative, but there will be many. Just like a lighthouse, you'll be offering a beacon for those navigating rough waters. You give them the hope that they can make it to safe ground and that they have a bright future after the storm. We commend this project and we thank everyone responsible for hearing the needs of victims and responding in such a positive and innovative way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sue and Lloyd. Ms. Danielle Carroll, I'll call up next. She's the sister of Kelly Wilkinson, who was raising Kelly's 3 children after she was killed in a domestic violence incident in 2021. Ms. Danielle Carroll. And her husband, Reece.
Thank you for having us here today. Sue's already set me off. I feel very humbled to share a room with you all. I would like to share a little bit about our story and how much projects like this can be beneficial to families in need. February last year, I lost my mum suddenly to a brain aneurysm at the age of 55. 7 weeks later, I lost my sister. To an unimaginable domestic violence murder, allegedly by her ex-husband, leaving behind her 3 young children. Nothing can prepare you for the phone call I received from my dad that morning. Sorry. To be honest, though, first days were such a blur. We'd taken in Kelly's 3 children alongside our own 5, and with so many families and friends there to support us, our house was just absolute chaos. During this time, our focus was on the well-being of the children, and we haven't even thought of the legalities of our new situation. Fortunately for us, with the guidance of Sian Ross Smith from the MATE program, we mapped out what we needed to get in order straight away, with interim guardianship being at the top of our list. At this point, we were connected with Dr. Jacoba Brash and Women's Legal, who we can't thank enough for looking after our family. Within 2 business days, we had interim guardianship orders. This was a massive achievement, not only by Justice Brash and her team, but for the family court system as well. The Lighthouse project will be invaluable to vulnerable families needing immediate access to services such as doctors, schoolings, therapy services and others, the same as what my family needed access to straight away. Knowing you have a great team of lawyers on board to help, followed by a quick responding court system, takes so much stress out of the process. I congratulate everyone involved in the Lighthouse project.
Thank you to Rosie, to Lloyd and to Sue, and to Danielle and to Reese for your strength and your support. I want to assure you on behalf of the courts we'll do everything we can to honour what's occurred. Can I now thank David Pringle, our CEO, to making this program possible, with Virginia Wilson, also to Jordan and Fraser, who've put this event on tonight, with our incredibly capable Denise Healy. Please join us for morning tea. Thank you very much.